Agatha Raisin and the death news that shock Carsely. Good evening, dear friends, and welcome back to the Detective Notebook. Tonight, we once again slip into the charming but never peaceful village of Carsely, tucked deep in the rolling Cotswolds. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? And tell us, did you like our stories? I love seeing your suggestions. That will help our channel to grow. Before we begin, feel free to tap the like button and subscribe. Only if this kind of cozy chaos is your cup of tea. It truly helps the channel grow and keeps these mysteries coming your way. Chapter 1. Morning Calm and Carefully Hidden Claws. Agatha Raisin woke with the strong and deeply held conviction that the day had already begun badly. This belief was reinforced by the fact that Hodge was sitting on her chest. "Get off," Agatha muttered, prying one heavy paw away from her collarbone. "I'm awake. You've won." Hodge did not move. He stared at her with the cool disappointment of someone who had expected better life choices. Boswell, meanwhile, sat at the foot of the bed, tail neatly wrapped, wearing an expression that suggested Agatha's very existence was an inconvenience. Agatha swung her legs out of bed and shuffled toward the kitchen, trailed closely by Judgment. She caught her reflection in the hall mirror and winced. Hair flattened on one side, defiant on the other. Lines at the corners of her mouth that had not been there when she'd moved to Carsely. Or had they? Lighting, she told herself firmly. It's always lighting. Coffee came first. It always did. She measured out the grounds with a hand grown unsteady, not from age, she insisted, but from irritation. The kettle boiled with an aggressive hiss, which she found comforting. When the coffee bloomed, dark and sharp, she inhaled deeply. Paint stripping, proper. Toast followed, slightly overdone. She scraped it thinly and refused butter with the martyrdom of someone who very much wanted butter. "Perfectly dry," she said aloud, daring the kitchen to argue. Hodge and Boswell circled as she opened the cat food. "This is chicken," Agatha announced. "Again. I don't hear either of you contributing to household expenses." Boswell sniffed, recoiled, then ate with exaggerated reluctance. Hodge dove in enthusiastically, scattering bits onto the floor. Agatha sighed. Lovely, like living with pigs who judge. Outside, Carsely was stirring. Through the open window drifted the sound of voices, the clink of crockery, the faint thud of trestle tables being dragged into place. The village news luncheon was today, which meant polite smiles, tepid tea, and the unveiling of the parish newsletter as though it were a state secret. Agatha carried her coffee to the window and looked out at the lane. Bunting fluttered between cottages. Mrs. Withers was already sweeping an immaculate path. Everything looked rehearsed, as if the village were collectively holding its breath. She took a sip and grimaced. Still too weak. She added more coffee grounds and felt marginally better. Her gaze snagged on herself again, reflected faintly in the glass. She adjusted her dressing gown, tugged at the collar, and wondered, briefly, unwisely, whether she should have tried harder with exercise or moisturizer or life. A voice floated in from outside. "Have you heard? Someone's been unwell." Another voice murmured agreement, hushed and excited. Agatha leaned closer to the window, then stopped herself. Eavesdropping was a slippery slope. "People are always unwell," Agatha said firmly, to no one, especially when they want attention. The name drifted up a moment later, almost casually. Prue Devonshire Stumming, of course. Agatha's jaw tightened. Prue Devonshire, newly arrived, glossy, admired in that immediate, irritating way that suggested effortlessness. The sort of woman who made a point of not trying and succeeded anyway. Agatha felt an unwelcome prickle of jealousy crawl up her spine. "Well," she muttered, turning away, "we can't all waft." Hodge abandoned his bowl and jumped onto the counter, sniffing her sleeve critically. Boswell followed, staring at her face. Agatha folded her arms. "Don't look at me like that. I'm perfectly adequate." The cats disagreed silently. She finished her coffee, rinsed the mug, and straightened her shoulders.
Whatever gossip was floating about, whatever admiration Prue Devonshire was collecting like loose change, Agatha Raisin would face it unbothered, or at least convincingly so. She changed into something respectable, applied lipstick with determination rather than precision, and reached for her coat. As she opened the door, the village sounds rose again, too cheerful, too arranged. Agatha paused on the threshold, unease flickering briefly beneath her irritation. Then she stepped out, chin up, temper tucked nicely away, and headed into Carsely, determined to not care at all.
Agatha Raisin walked into Carsely with the measured confidence of a woman who refused to be impressed by hanging baskets. The village looked irritatingly perfect. Thatched cottages preened beneath pale sunshine, gardens fussed with color, and every path appeared freshly swept, as though a judging panel might materialize at any moment. Agatha nodded curtly at passers-by, receiving smiles that were bright, brief, and carefully calibrated. "Morning, Agatha," called Mrs. Withers, her eyes flicking, quite deliberately, to Agatha's shoes. "Still vertical," Agatha replied. "It's early yet." Mrs. Withers smiled thinly and turned back to her roses, which were, Agatha noted sourly, doing far better than last year. Competition in Carsely was rarely spoken of, but it bloomed everywhere. She paused by a low stone wall to admire a garden bursting with daffodils, each trumpet standing to attention. A small sign read, "Darcy Somerville." Of course it did. Agatha leaned closer, sniffed, and muttered, "Trying too hard," though the flowers were flawless. At the vicarage, the door opened before she could knock. Mrs. Bloxby stood there, serene as ever, radiating gentle competence and the smell of freshly baked scones. "Agatha, how lovely," she said. "Come in, dear. The kettle's just boiled." Agatha entered, instantly soothed despite herself. The vicarage kitchen was warm, cluttered, and reassuringly imperfect. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea and tilted her head. "There's quite a buzz today." "So I've noticed," Agatha said. "You'd think the Queen was coming." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "Well, the village news luncheon is always significant." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "Oh, nothing dreadful," Mrs. Bloxby said lightly. Then, after a pause, "though there may be one or two unexpected announcements." Agatha sipped her tea. It tasted faintly of cinnamon and restraint. Unexpected how? Mrs. Bloxby only smiled again, which Agatha had learned was the clerical equivalent of locking a door. Voices sounded from the hall, and moments later Prue Devonshire appeared, as if summoned by irritation alone. She wore pale blue, which suited her annoyingly well, and carried herself with an ease that suggested mirrors had never argued with her. "Agatha," Prue said warmly, "how nice to see you." Agatha assessed her in one swift, merciless glance. Hair glossy, skin luminous, smile practiced but effective. "Likewise," she said, "you seem settled. Oh, Carsley's been so welcoming. Everyone's simply marvelous." Agatha wondered who everyone excluded. They exchanged pleasantries sharp enough to draw blood if mishandled. Mrs. Bloxby hovered, tactful as wallpaper. "I was just saying," Prue continued, "how funny it is to run into familiar names in new places. I didn't realize you were married to James Lacey." Agatha's cup paused midair. "Was," she corrected smoothly. "Past tense has its uses." Prue blinked. "Of course. I met him years ago through mutual friends. Such a gentleman." "So they say," Agatha replied, smiling with all her teeth. The air tightened. Mrs. Bloxby coughed gently and changed the subject. "I hear Nigel won't be attending the luncheon." Agatha seized on it. "Nigel Renshaw. That'll be a relief to half the room." Prue tilted her head. "Oh, hasn't anyone told you? He's been resting." The word landed oddly, like a plate set down too carefully. "Resting," Agatha echoed. "From what? Civility?" Mrs. Bloxby's smile faltered, just slightly. "He's been unwell." Agatha felt a faint prickle at the base of her neck. "Unwell how?" "No one seems quite sure," Prue said calmly. Too calmly. Nigel always did enjoy mystery. Agatha studied her. Prue's hands were steady around her teacup, her expression serene. If Nigel were merely ill, people would be fussing, sending casseroles, gossiping enthusiastically. This felt different.
"Well," Agatha said briskly, setting down her cup, "I'm sure we'll hear all about it soon enough." Outside, church bells began to ring, bright and insistent. The village news luncheon loomed closer with every chime. As Agatha stepped back into the sunlight, she glanced once more toward the far end of the lane, where Nigel Renshaw's cottage sat quiet and shuttered. "Resting," she murmured. The word followed her as she walked on, light as a compliment, sharp as a warning.
Chapter 2. The Announcement That Froze the Teacups. The village hall smelled of sponge cake, furniture polish, and restrained excitement. Agatha Raisin arrived precisely on time, which in Carsely meant she was already late enough to be noticed. The hall buzzed with chatter, chairs scraping, teaspoons clinking against china. Long tables sagged under plates of Victoria sponge, Battenberg cut with militant precision, and a few unfortunate offerings that looked suspiciously shop-bought. Agatha paused just inside the door, performing a swift and merciless inventory. Mrs. Withers in florals too young for her, Darcy Somerville in cream, impractical, smug, Prue Devonshire in soft green, looking as though she'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled Effortless Village Living. Agatha straightened her shoulders and moved toward the tea urn. "Agatha!" Darcy called brightly, eyes flicking to Agatha's lipstick. "How bold!" "Thank you," Agatha said. "I like my confidence visible from a distance." She poured tea, tasted it, and resisted the urge to wince. Weak. Criminally weak. She added milk out of spite and turned, scanning the room. Nigel Renshaw was conspicuously absent. His chair at the front sat empty, newsletter proofs neatly stacked beside it, as if waiting for a man who had merely stepped outside. The vicar clapped his hands gently. "If we could all settle, please." The chatter softened, chairs shuffled, plates were abandoned with reluctance. Agatha took a seat near the aisle, positioning herself for both observation and escape. The vicar smiled nervously. "Thank you all for coming. Before we enjoy the luncheon properly, there is an announcement." Something in his tone tightened the room. Teacups hovered mid-air. Someone coughed. "I am afraid," the vicar continued, clearing his throat, "that Nigel Renshaw was found dead this morning in his cottage." Silence fell like a dropped tray. Then came sound all at once, gasps, murmurs, the clatter of a spoon hitting the floor. Agatha felt her stomach dip, her mind sharpening instantly. Dead, not unwell, not resting. Prue Devonshire swayed slightly, then collapsed backward into her chair with theatrical neatness. Two women rushed to her side. "She's fainted," someone hissed. Agatha watched closely. Prue's eyes were closed, lashes resting perfectly, her breathing steady, too steady. "Goodness," Darcy whispered, hand to chest. "How dreadful!" Some faces looked genuinely shocked, others merely looked alert, calculating, or oddly relieved. Agatha clocked every reaction. Mrs. Withers stared at the floor. The postmistress's lips moved silently as if counting. One man immediately reached for a biscuit. The vicar raised his hands. "Please, please, the authorities have ruled it a sudden death. There's no cause for alarm." Sudden, Agatha thought, a word chosen for comfort. Whispers crept through the hall like ivy. "They argued last week. He was writing something. He always did like stirring trouble. He knew things." Agatha leaned toward the woman beside her. "What sort of sudden?" The woman shrugged. Sudden, or sudden after another row." Prue revived conveniently as smelling salts appeared, blinking as though the world had personally offended her. "Oh dear," she murmured weakly. "How awful." Agatha noted her hair remained immaculate. The vicar attempted to regain control. "Nigel was a valued member of our community, sharp-witted, dedicated." "Sharp-tongued," someone muttered. Agatha hid a smile. Nigel Renshaw had been many things. Beloved was not one of them. His newsletter exposed minor scandals with relish, unpaid dues, secret affairs, questionable charity accounts. He'd made enemies with ink and enthusiasm.
As plates were reluctantly redistributed and tea refilled, the atmosphere never quite recovered. Conversation hummed too loudly in places, stopped too abruptly in others. Agatha caught snippets, arguments, grudges, threats made and laughed off. She felt it then, that familiar itch, the one that started behind her eyes and worked its way into her spine. Curiosity, irritation, a need to know. She glanced again at the empty chair, the untouched stack of newsletters. Nigel had been planning something. You didn't die quietly with that many secrets half-written. As the luncheon staggered on, Agatha made a decision. While others speculated safely over cake, she would go somewhere quieter. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and slipped toward the door, heart thudding, not with fear, but with purpose. Nigel Renshaw might be dead, but his story, Agatha suspected, was only just beginning.
Nigel Renshaw's cottage sat at the far end of the lane, neat as a postcard and unnervingly silent. Agatha approached it with a briskness she hoped read as concern rather than curiosity. Curtains were half-drawn, as if someone had changed their mind mid-morning. A police car idled farther up the road, unattended. No Bill Wong. Of course not. Bill was always away when things became interesting. She knocked. No answer. "Well," she murmured, straightening her coat. "I tried." The door yielded under her hand, unlocked and obedient. Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of lemon polish, layered over something sharper, almost almond-like. Agatha paused, senses pricking. The sitting room was immaculate, too immaculate. Cushions aligned, rug straightened. Nigel had never been tidy. His chaos had been personal. "Nigel?" she called softly. No reply. She stepped farther in, heels tapping on polished wood. Papers lay stacked on the side table, newsletters arranged with almost military precision. A teacup sat untouched beside the kettle, a faint skin forming on the surface. Tea went cold when someone forgot it, or when they never meant to drink it. Then she saw him. Nigel Renshaw sat in his armchair, head tilted slightly, glasses perched on his nose. At first glance he looked merely contemplative. Then Agatha noticed the stillness, the absence of breath, the way the room seemed to lean away from him. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh, Nigel." She did not approach closer than necessary. No gore, no drama, just a man who had stopped mid-sentence with the world. The peacefulness of it made her uneasy. Death in Carsely should have been messier, more apologetic. Agatha's gaze moved again, cataloguing. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, nothing broken except the rhythm of the room. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with recognition. This was wrong in a deliberate way. On the desk lay a notebook, its cover bent with use. Agatha hesitated only a moment before lifting it. Inside, names filled the pages in Nigel's sharp hand. Some circled, many crossed out. Mrs. Withers, Darcy Somerville, the postmistress. Half the village accounted for like debts paid. Her finger traced down the list. She did not reach the end. A sound came from the hall. Footsteps, the key turning. Agatha snapped the notebook shut and replaced it, pulse thudding. She moved quickly, silently, slipping toward the back door as it opened. "Hello?" a voice called. Agatha was already gone, easing herself out into the garden, breath shallow, heart racing. She paused only long enough to glance back at the cottage, its windows staring blankly. Outside, the air felt colder. The almond tang lingered in her nose. She walked briskly away, face composed, mind anything but. Someone had planned this, and someone else had just arrived. As Agatha reached the lane, she slowed, smoothed her hair, and adopted an expression of mild concern. Inside her chest, questions multiplied. Why had Nigel made a list? Why had the tea been poured but untouched? And who exactly had walked into that cottage just seconds too late? She headed back toward the village, the image of crossed-out names following her like a shadow. Chapter 3. The Widow Who Wasn't Crying. Marion Renshaw lived in a narrow cottage just beyond the green, tasteful in the way that suggested decisions made long ago and never revisited. Agatha knocked and was admitted almost immediately, as though Marian had been waiting. She was a thin woman with carefully arranged hair and eyes that looked startlingly clear for someone recently bereaved. No redness, no puffiness, no theatrical clutching of tissues. "I wondered when you'd come," Marian said, stepping aside. "People always do." Agatha entered, noting the faint smell of furniture polish and something floral, overly sweet. Lilies, an unfortunate choice. "I thought I'd check how you were," she said, which was true enough, if incomplete. Marian gestured toward the sitting room. "I'm quite all right. Tea?" "Please," Agatha said, automatically, then watched closely as Marian moved with calm efficiency. No shaking hands, no hesitation. She poured water, measured leaves, and spoke as if discussing the weather. Nigel would have hated the fuss. All those people pretending they admired him. Agatha sat, folding her gloves carefully. "You didn't admire him?" Marian smiled thinly. "I endured him. There's a difference." She set down the teapot and finally met Agatha's gaze. "You know he was planning something, don't you?" Agatha raised her eyebrow. "That depends who you ask." "The next issue," Marian said. "He told me he was going to expose certain arrangements. Petty, mostly, but embarrassing. He enjoyed that." Agatha pictured the crossed-out names in the notebook. "And how did you feel about that?" Marian shrugged. It was typical Nigel, stirring trouble to feel important. "Important enough to be killed?" Agatha asked lightly. Marian didn't flinch. "I wouldn't know. I wasn't here." "No? I left Carsely 3 days ago. Went to stay with a friend. Nigel and I argued. I needed space." Agatha sipped her tea. It was strong, proper, funny, she said. "I could have sworn Mrs. Withers seeing you yesterday." Marian's smile tightened. "Mrs. Withers sees what she wants." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but it was deliberate. Agatha let it stretch. Marian eventually broke it herself. "Nigel had a weakness," she said, "for women that flattered him, distracted him, made him feel clever." Agatha felt a familiar prickle. "Is that so?" "Oh, yes," Marian said coolly. "He mistook charm for loyalty. Dangerous, really." A face flickered in Agatha's mind. Prue Devonshire. Glossy. Admired. Too calm. "Do you have someone in mind?" Agatha asked. Marian met her gaze steadily. "Don't you?" Agatha stood, smoothing her skirt. "Thank you for the tea." At the door, Marian added, almost as an afterthought, "Nigel wasn't loved, but he was noticed. People resent being noticed." Outside, the air felt sharp against Agatha's cheeks. She walked away slowly, thoughts tumbling. Marian's grief was absent, or expertly managed. Her timeline felt slippery, and her comment about flirtation landed with too much precision to be casual. As Agatha reached the green, she glanced back once. Marian stood framed in her doorway, watching, waiting. Agatha felt the investigation shift, subtly but unmistakably. Nigel Renshaw had left behind more than a body. He had left a web of quiet resentments, and she had the distinct impression that someone else was about to step into it, whether invited or not.
Prue Devonshire invited Agatha for tea in the middle of the village green, which Agatha considered the social equivalent of a duel at dawn. "Do come by this afternoon," Prue said brightly, her voice carrying just far enough for Mrs. Withers and 2 members of the garden club to hear. "It would be so nice to talk privately." Agatha smiled with all the warmth of a tax demand. "I'd hate to disappoint an audience." Prue's cottage was immaculate in a way that suggested professional help. Pale walls, tasteful art, flowers arranged as though they'd practiced. The air smelled faintly of bergamot and ambition. Agatha took a seat on a cream sofa she would never have chosen herself. Tea appeared almost instantly. Prue poured with elegant precision, hands steady, posture relaxed.
"Such a tragedy," she said softly. "Nigel was difficult." "That's one word for it," Agatha replied, accepting her cup. The tea was perfect. She resented that, too. "He fixated on people, on me in particular. He accused me of forging charity accounts." Agatha lifted an eyebrow. "Did you?" Prue's smile trembled just slightly. "Of course not. I've devoted myself to good causes. He was cruel, obsessed. I think he enjoyed threatening people." "And yet," Agatha said, "you seem remarkably composed." Sigh. Prue pressed a hand to her chest. "Shock affects people differently." "Some faint," Agatha said. "Some make tea." Prue laughed lightly, then stilled. "I know this must look convenient." Agatha's gaze drifted around the room, everything in its place, no mess, no grief. "Nigel accused half the village of something. He kept lists." Prue stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Lists?" "Habit of his," Agatha said casually. "He liked crossing people out." Prue took a sip of tea, eyes fixed on the cup. "Well, I hope I was crossed out early." Agatha leaned back. "Funny you should say that." A pause stretched between them, taut but polite. Then Prue smiled again, too quickly. "James Lacey always said you were sharp." Agatha's fingers tightened on her cup. "Did he?" "Yes, years ago. He spoke of you fondly." Prue tilted her head. "I ran into him recently. Such a small world." Agatha felt the familiar sting, sharp and unwelcome. "The world's full of people who know James," Agatha said coolly. "Fewer who understand him." For the first time, Prue's composure cracked. Just a flicker, annoyance, perhaps. It vanished almost at once. "I'm glad you came," Prue said, standing. "Transparency matters." "Does it?" Agatha replied, rising as well. As she reached the door, her eye caught something on the side table. A notebook, brown cover, bent corner, identical to the one on Nigel's desk. Agatha did not comment. She merely smiled, nodded, and stepped outside into the fresh air. Behind her, the door closed softly. As she walked away, heart thudding, one thought repeated itself with increasing clarity. Prue Devonshire was either the most unfortunate woman in Carsely or the most careful.
Chapter 4. Red Herrings Served with Biscuits. The duck and partridge was at its most welcoming when tragedy was fresh. Agatha stepped inside and was greeted by the comforting assault of warm air, yeast, and something fried beyond redemption. The pub hummed with low voices and clinking glasses, the sort of noise that encouraged confession disguised as complaint. She ordered a gin and tonic, strong, and took a seat near the bar where information tended to slosh. "Nigel, eh?" the landlord said, polishing a glass that was already clean. "Never thought it'd be him." "Few people do," Agatha replied. "That's the point." She sipped her drink, letting her eyes roam. Mrs. Withers sat stiff-backed at a corner table, whistling fiercely. Two members of the garden club huddled over wine. The parish councillors occupied their usual spot, looking both important and deeply inconvenienced. "He had enemies," someone said loudly. "Garden Club hated him." "History Society," another countered. "He mocked their pamphlet." "Parish Council," a third insisted. "Too many questions about expenses." Agatha smiled faintly. If enemies were fatal, half of us would be dead. Laughter rippled, slightly forced. A man at the bar, red-faced, unsteady, leaned toward her, slurring. "Saw him arguing. Night before. Proper row." "Who with?" Agatha asked, gentle as cream. "The postmistress," he said triumphantly. "Right outside. About letters." "Letters?" Agatha echoed. "Charity mail," he said, then hiccuped. "Or secrets. Hard to say." Across the room, the postmistress stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the bar, then away. Agatha noted who else listened too closely. Darcy Somerville's head tilted, Prue Devonshire remaining serenely disengaged. Agatha drained her glass. "Funny," she said lightly. "Everyone heard something different." "That's Carsely," the landlord said. "Truth's flexible." Agatha stood, pulling on her coat. So are lies. As she left, laughter followed her, but so did silence. She felt the pattern forming, loose threads waiting to be tugged. Outside, the evening air smelled of damp stone and possibility. Somewhere among the rumors, a truth waited, and Agatha intended to find it.
Agatha Raisin returned to her cottage, the scent of wet earth and fading sunlight clinging to her coat. She unlocked the door and was immediately met with the double blare of Hodge and Boswell. "Finally," she muttered, setting down her bag. "I see you've been holding the fort." Hodge yawned with the audacity of someone who had already conquered the morning. Boswell, tail coiled neatly around his paws, regarded her as though her entire day might be improved or ruined by the wrong choice of chair. Breakfast came again, or as Agatha called it, second breakfast. Toast, buttered this time under protest, and a bowl of chicken for the cats. Hodge nudged her hand impatiently, while Boswell leapt onto the counter to inspect her note-taking posture. "You think too hard," Boswell seemed to say. Agatha ignored him, scribbling anyway. Her mind returned to Nigel Renshaw's cottage, the faint bitter smell beneath the polish. Almonds? Cyanide? Surely not. Carsely was not known for poison, yet Nigel's death insisted on being peculiar. She sipped tea and shivered slightly. Even her cats paused, noses twitching at the lingering unease in the air. She spread old newsletters across the table, one after another, yellowing with age. Nigel had a method. He exposed scandals slowly, carefully, letting secrets percolate until people were too embarrassed to ignore them. Names appeared repeatedly, underlined or circled. The same pattern emerged. Someone lauded with exaggerated warmth in one article, then quietly implicated in the next. And one name kept appearing, Prue Devonshire. Always praised, excessively, always elegant, charming, faultless. Agatha's stomach twisted. Repetition so obvious it was almost an advert for suspicion. She jotted notes, tried to draw connections, and scowled. "Too neat," she muttered aloud, "too polished." Hodge climbed onto her lap, meowing sharply. Boswell leapt onto the desk, scattering papers with a theatrical swipe. Agatha sighed. "Honestly," she said, gathering papers from the floor. But as she stacked them, her eye caught something she had missed before. One article, partially hidden beneath a newsletter, had been overlooked, a subtle critique buried within a compliment. Prue had been singled out, quietly, for a minor impropriety, described with faintly ironic language. Agatha leaned back, tapping her pen against her chin. "A smokescreen," she murmured. "All that praise, designed to distract, to obscure." Hodge nudged her hand. Boswell yawned, unimpressed by her deduction. Agatha smiled faintly at their judgment. Even they could sense when a story hid something important. The air in the cottage was warm and familiar, scented faintly with tea and cat fur, yet Agatha felt the subtle tension tightening again. Something had been overlooked, something right in front of her eyes, revealed only when the chaos of Boswell's paw gave her the perspective she lacked. She restacked her notes, her mind racing, cross-referencing Nigel's death with the newsletters, with village gossip, with her own observations. She began to see the outlines of a pattern. Praise, jealousy, resentment, secrets, each thread interwoven, leading inexorably towards someone who knew more than they claimed. Hodge leapt down, Boswell padding beside him, both apparently satisfied with their contribution to detective work. Agatha sipped the last of her tea, inhaling warmth, letting it settle her nerves. And yet, the notebook in her mind, the hidden article, the unspoken critique, lingered. Who had been hiding behind charm? Why was the truth disguised as a compliment? And which thread, if tugged, would unravel the delicate web Nigel had left behind? Agatha leaned forward, pen in hand, ready to follow the trail wherever it might lead. The investigation, previously scattered and reactive, was now sharpening, and Carsley's carefully rehearsed calm was beginning to crack.
Chapter 5. Jealousy, Lies, and Lipstick Smudges. Agatha Raisin entered the Blossom and Comb, Carsley's village salon, with the careful composure of a woman about to administer a minor social interrogation. The scent of shampoo, heated wax, and faint floral polish wrapped around her like a cloak. Hairspray hovered in the air, caught mid-dance by the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Prue Devonshire was already there, seated with perfect posture in the styling chair, reading a magazine in that serene, infuriating way Agatha had long suspected of being practiced. Her pale blue scarf shimmered like a signal flag, immaculate, untouchable, irritating. "Prue," Agatha said, stepping closer, "what an unexpected pleasure." Prue looked up, calm and radiant. "Agatha, I didn't expect to see you here." "I hear gossip travels faster than bleach here," Agatha said dryly, "and I have a few questions I'd like answered." Prue's smile didn't waver. "Of course, but isn't jealousy exhausting?" Agatha blinked. "Jealousy? I wouldn't know the meaning." She leaned closer, voice dropping just enough for the stylist to pause and raise an eyebrow. "You, however, seem comfortable in your advantages." A subtle flicker crossed her face. Quick, controlled, almost imperceptible. Agatha noticed. Her pulse quickened. "Advantage," Prue said smoothly. "Do you mean charm and civility? Those are not crimes, Agatha." "Civility is," Agatha said, tapping a finger on the arm of the chair, "when it hides intent." The stylist, who had been quietly trimming the postmistress's bangs, stiffened. Prue's hands fidgeted slightly, dropping the magazine. Agatha leaned in just enough to hear the faintest admission. I visited Nigel late," Prue said, voice almost inaudible, then recovered, folding her hands neatly. Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Late? The night before his sudden demise?" Prue's serene mask cracked ever so slightly. "It was nothing," she said too quickly. "Simply a word of advice." The stylist, pretending to examine a strand of hair, pretended not to watch, but clearly did. Agatha stored the detail in her mind like a dagger tucked carefully behind her ribs. "Advice," Agatha repeated, tone gentle but firm. "For whom exactly?" Prue's composure snapped. She stood, brushing past the salon chairs like a breeze scattering petals. In the scuffle, one of her gloves tore, fingertip missing, lying in a neat half-circle on the floor. Agatha's heart thumped. She crouched and picked it up, tucking it into her coat pocket with the practiced air of someone who had been expecting a clue all along. The glove's fine fabric felt like silk against her fingers, soft, yet weighted with implication. Outside, Prue's scarf fluttered in the breeze. Her heels clicked with rapid determination, the sound echoing like accusation across the cobbled street. Agatha followed at a discreet distance, noting the tension in the movement, the flush on Prue's cheeks, half indignation, half irritation. Back inside, the stylist whispered almost conspiratorially, "She shouldn't have said that. Not here." Agatha smiled faintly. "Perfectly," she said. The remark was dry, almost affectionate, but her mind raced. A torn glove, a slipped admission, a perfectly staged exit. Was it carelessness? Or was it left intentionally, a breadcrumb in a trail only Agatha could follow? Agatha smoothed her coat, glanced around the salon, mirrors reflecting concerned and curious faces, and stepped into the street. The air smelled faintly of shampoo, spring rain, and tension. Agatha's pulse had quickened, curiosity mingling with something else, the thrill of catching a rival mid-slip, the satisfaction of discovering the first tangible clue that might lead her closer to the truth. She pressed the glove in her pocket, heart thumping, mind alive. The investigation had gained shape, and Prue Devonshire, so composed, so untouchable, had left an opening. Agatha Raisin intended to walk right through it.
Agatha Raisin arrived at Marion Renshaw's cottage under the guise of checking on her again. In truth, she was after something more precise, Nigel's notebook, or at least the memory of it. Marion, who had perfected the art of appearing both accommodating and indifferent, offered tea. Agatha accepted, but left it largely untouched, eyes fixed on the neat stacks of papers scattered across the side table. "So," Agatha said lightly, "this notebook of Nigel's, may I have a look?" Marion raised a delicate eyebrow. "You're very interested in his notes." "I find lists comforting Agatha replied, smiling, and sometimes revealing. Marian hesitated, then moved aside, allowing Agatha to take the notebook. Its leather cover was worn, corners softened by repeated handling. Agatha flipped to the page she remembered most vividly, the one with names marked, underlined, or crossed out. Her eyes scanned the familiar scrawl. Most names bore the neat diagonal slash of someone no longer relevant. But one name drew her attention immediately. Prue Devonshire. It was circled, small, precise, untouched by any strike. Agatha's heart picked up pace. She traced the circle with a fingertip. Why was Prue singled out in this way? Marian stirred the tea, eyes fixed elsewhere. Nigel feared someone close, not just any stranger, someone who could make him vulnerable. Agatha blinked. Close? Marian nodded. He never wrote it down explicitly, but his handwriting hinted it. Look carefully. He didn't cross her out because he wasn't finished, or because he didn't know for certain. Agatha's mind raced. Crossed-out names were minor irritants, people he considered exposed, documented. The uncrossed, circled names suggested ongoing concern. She flipped pages back and forth, tracing connections. Comments, annotations, even subtle praise now seemed coded. Prue, repeatedly commended, repeatedly involved. And then it clicked. The pattern. The list tracked more than personality or rivalry. It tracked knowledge. Who knew about the forged donations? Prue's circle marked attention, perhaps suspicion, perhaps guilt. Agatha leaned back, feeling the familiar tingle of anticipation. She pictured the village's charitable accounts, the glossy newsletters, the meticulously crafted appearances. What had Prue been hiding, and why had Nigel singled her out with such care? A sudden sound made her start. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, creaking along the stairs. Agatha's head snapped up. Marian's eyes widened subtly, lips parting slightly. The sound came again, closer this time, deliberate, controlled. Did someone forget to announce themselves? Agatha kept her voice light. Marian's hands trembled just a fraction as she reached for a teacup. Another step, heavier now, paused at the top of the stairs. The moment stretched, taut as a violin string. Agatha's pulse quickened. Whoever it was, they had not expected to see her here, and they certainly hadn't expected the notebook to be in Agatha's hands. She closed it slowly, heart thumping, and slid it into her bag. Her mind ticked through possibilities. Visitor? Witness? Accomplice? The staircase remained still for a heartbeat. Then a shadow shifted. Agatha stood, her instincts sharpening, every muscle attuned. Whoever was upstairs had information, and potentially motive. The room smelled faintly of tea and polished wood, masking the tension that had built beneath it. Agatha pressed herself against the doorway, ears straining for any hint. She had found the list. She understood its significance. But now the mystery was no longer just on paper. It was alive, immediate, and dangerously close. Agatha Raisin knew that the next moments would push her closer to the heart of the truth. Whoever or whatever was upstairs might hold the key, and she was determined to find it before the chance slipped away.
Chapter 6. The Trap is Set with China Cups. The village hall was quiet in the early afternoon, sunlight pooling on the polished floorboards, dust motes floating lazily in the golden rays. Agatha Raisin arrived to find a small crowd gathered near the dais, murmuring anxiously. The postmistress, a woman usually as unflappable as her morning deliveries, sat in the center, hands trembling slightly over her handbag. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice wavering. I need to confess." Agatha raised an eyebrow, noting the crease between the woman's brows and the shiny teacup clutched in her hand. "I was responsible," the postmistress said, voice breaking. "Nigel's tea, the bitter taste, it was meant for me. I didn't intend—" The crowd gasped. Some murmured sympathy, others relief. Agatha could see why. The postmistress had always been mild-mannered, devoted to routine, never a spark of ambition or malice, a believable culprit. I must have mismeasured," she continued, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I wasn't thinking. It was an accident. Please, forgive me."
Voices whispered around the room, soft echoes of shock and understanding. Darcy Somerville muttered something about goodness gracious, while Mrs. Withers dabbed her chin, nodding solemnly. Even Prue Devonshire's eyes widened, briefly human, briefly uncertain. Agatha sipped her tea and observed. The scene was almost too neat. Tears timed to perfection, hands trembling just enough, the crowd's sigh of collective relief, too rehearsed. She had seen this before. People wanted closure, wanted someone to blame, and the postmistress provided the perfect target. Agatha rose slowly, letting the silence settle like a velvet curtain. "I see," she said softly. "Accidents do happen." Her voice carried warmth, yet beneath it lurked the hint of doubt, sharp as a pin. The postmistress's lip quivered further. Yes, it was an accident. I never meant—" Agatha studied the evidence, the timing of the tea, the portion poured, the faint smell of almonds that had lingered in Nigel's cottage. Something didn't match. The dosage, the schedule, the opportunity. Motive? Minimal, practically non-existent. The narrative was too tidy, too convenient. "Forgive me for asking," Agatha said, stepping closer. "But if it was meant for you, why was Nigel the only one affected?" The postmistress blinked rapidly, voice faltering. I don't know. It was supposed to be harmless." Agatha smiled thinly. Beneath the sorrow, beneath the confession, there was something missing. Truth. Timing was off, motive insufficient, and yet the village had already begun to relax, murmuring reassurances, shifting their attention to refreshments. Agatha noted each movement, each glance, each easing of tension. The collective exhale felt premature, too easy. The postmistress's tears seemed a little too perfect, the confession a little too ready. Her gaze wandered around the hall, subtle exchanges, pauses, small smiles of relief. All were signals that the village wanted a resolution, but Agatha did not. "Of course," she said aloud, lifting her teacup, "accidents have a way of choosing their victims." She seated herself again, fingers tapping lightly against the china. Beneath her calm exterior, her mind raced. Something about this scene felt orchestrated, rehearsed, a performance designed to satisfy the curious without revealing the guilty. Agatha Raisin allowed the village to bask in relief, their shoulders loosening, their voices softer. But behind her thin smile, the gears of investigation turned relentlessly. She knew better. The confession was false, and the real story, still hidden, was waiting to make its entrance.
Back in her cottage, Agatha Raisin felt the familiar embrace of domestic calm, faint smells of tea, buttered toast, and the ever-judgmental presence of Hodge and Boswell. The cats were already alert, tails swishing, eyes bright with the kind of disdain only they could muster. "Hello, my little advisors," Agatha said, setting down her bag. "Did you notice something I missed?" Hodge leapt onto the counter, but refused to get near the teacups, ears flicking toward the stack of china. Boswell, more methodical, pawed at a single cup, pushing it slightly, sniffing at the residue within. Agatha frowned. "Now what are you two up to?" She examined the counter carefully. All teacups had been washed recently, but the faint bitter smell of almonds lingered on only a few, the ones Hodge had rejected and Boswell pawed. Her mind flickered to Nigel's cottage, the teacup left untouched, the faint almond tang in the air. A click in her head, a snap of realization. The poison hadn't been in the tea itself, it had been transferred through china. She crouched beside the counter, tracing the sequence of events. Crewe Devonshire had hosted a tasting at her cottage days before the luncheon, showing off new china. Cups were handled, polished, admired, and, unwittingly, contaminated. The poison had been slow-acting, absorbed into the surface, leaving an almost invisible trail. Agatha's lips tightened. The cats had been right. Hodge's refusal, Boswell's insistence, they had detected what her human senses could not. She leaned back, taking a slow sip from her own teacup, carefully chosen, freshly washed. Safety, for now. Her mind raced, piecing together the timeline. Prue had proximity, knowledge, charm, and a way to leave the village believing everything was accidental. Hodge meowed sharply, as though emphasizing her thought. Boswell nudged the suspect cup toward her, tail flicking in triumph. Agatha smiled, finally allowing herself a little laugh.
Clever beasts, she said. All this time the answer was right under my nose. She collected the teacups, making notes and sketches, considering how the poison could have transferred so subtly, faint residues, careful timing, selective handling. Prue's staged vulnerability, her neat confessions, her perfect composure, all now fit into a pattern clear as day. Agatha poured herself another cup of tea, inhaling the familiar aroma. The cats settled nearby, tails entwined, as if satisfied with their contribution. Even the faint warmth of the late afternoon sun felt conspiratorial, highlighting the small domestic victories that came from patience and observation. The cozy serenity of the cottage contrasted sharply with the revelation she held in her hands. Prue had orchestrated everything with elegance and precision, but the small, quiet interventions of Hodge and Boswell had revealed the truth. Agatha tapped her pen against the notebook. Evidence now aligned. Timing, poison, motive, opportunity. Everything pointed clearly. The missing link, the subtle signature, had been highlighted by two very discerning cats. She glanced at the clock. The village would be preparing for evening routines. Agatha, however, felt an urgent excitement, a need to act before Prue could cover her tracks. "Time to see this through," Agatha murmured. Hodge purred, Boswell mewed as if in agreement. Together, they had noticed first. Outside, the streets of Carsely were quiet, lanterns beginning to glow against the creeping dusk. Agatha grabbed her bag, slipping the notes and sketches inside carefully. Her mind was set. The confrontation would be precise, public, and undeniable. The cats followed her to the door, tails high, judgmental gazes fixed on the garden. Agatha smiled faintly, feeling the comforting rhythm of routine and the sharp thrill of impending justice. It was time to confront Prue Devonshire, and for the truth, long obscured, to finally surface.
Chapter 7. Truth Served Publicly. The village hall hummed with anticipation, sunlight streaming through the tall windows and dust motes dancing lazily in the warm beams. Agatha Raisin arrived, carrying her bag of notes, sketches, and the evidence she had painstakingly collected, the weight of it resting in her hands like a sharpened scalpel. Hodge and Boswell were absent, left to oversee the cottage, but their influence lingered in Agatha's confidence. "Good afternoon," she said, voice calm and even, stepping to the front where chairs had been arranged hastily. The villagers murmured, curious and uneasy, while Prue Devonshire stood near the back, a practiced smile still in place, though it wavered under Agatha's sharp gaze. Agatha cleared her throat and began, slow, deliberate. "I've been piecing together the events leading to Nigel Renshaw's sudden departure from us. I believe the truth deserves clarity, particularly in light of recent misstatements." Eyes turned, whispers fluttered. Even Darcy Somerville leaned forward, suddenly alert. "The postmistress," Agatha continued, "confessed tearfully to an accidental poisoning, a story convenient, neat, and entirely false. Let us consider the facts. The tea, the cups, the timing." She gestured toward a table where she displayed the teacups, now carefully labeled. The faint bitter smell of almonds, first detected at Nigel's cottage, was not in the tea itself. It was transferred slowly, imperceptibly, via the china. The cups used were specific to a tasting, hosted by one Miss Devonshire. A hush fell. Prue's composure faltered slightly, just enough to reveal tension. "Evidence of preparation, precision, and knowledge," Agatha said, her voice light but edged with steel. "The poisoned cups were handled selectively. The timing was calculated to coincide with the luncheon, allowing for a false confession to take root, providing alibis for those unsuspecting." Agatha moved to the notebooks, flipping them open. Nigel's list, names crossed out, names circled, served as a tracker of knowledge. Who knew of forged charitable donations? One name, highlighted repeatedly, remained uncrossed: Prue Devonshire. The hall shifted. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the villagers. Prue's eyes darted, mask slipping, lips pressing into a thin line. Agatha's smile was deliberate, controlled. "The postmistress did not benefit. She is innocent of malice.
The true culprit, however, orchestrated events with charm, timing, and calculation, relying on our expectations of civility to disguise intent. It is no accident that she left a glove behind in the salon, an almost careless breadcrumb, revealing proximity to the victim and intent. Prue's hands tightened at her sides. The practiced poise trembled. A flicker of panic betrayed her carefully maintained calm. The method was subtle, the motive financial and reputational, and the execution relied on trust and appearances. Miss Devonshire's pattern emerges clearly when examined alongside Nigel's records, the chocolate almond scent, and the list of crossed-out names. The poison was administered indirectly, a slow transfer designed to mislead. The accounts were forged, and the deception elegantly concealed behind public charm. A whisper ran through the hall. Prue swallowed, her blue scarf tightening unconsciously around her neck. Agatha stepped closer, hands folded calmly. The evidence points unequivocally to her. The meticulous planning, the opportunity, and the carefully maintained innocence all unravel under scrutiny. Silence, thick and taut, filled the hall. Villagers exchanged glances, eyes wide, jaws set. Prue's mask, the perfect composure, fractured completely. The first cracks appeared around her eyes, the next in the subtle trembling of her hands. Agatha inhaled slowly, savoring the tension. She had dismantled the false confession, revealed the method, and exposed the web of lies. All that remained was the inevitable confrontation. The hall waited, poised on the precipice of revelation. Agatha's calm, composed logic had done its work, and Prue Devonshire could no longer hide.
The silence in the village hall was almost complete, a tense pause that seemed to hang between beams of sunlight and the polished floorboards. All eyes fixed on Prue Devonshire, whose carefully curated calm had crumbled entirely under Agatha Raisin's relentless logic. Prue's lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tight. She drew a deep breath, one that seemed to draw the air from the room, and then, finally, spoke. "Yes," she said, her voice steady but cold, carrying the weight of fury rather than grief. "It was me." Gasps rippled through the villagers, a fluttering chorus of shock and disbelief. Agatha, standing at the front, remained composed, notebook still in hand, pen poised as if to capture the confession for posterity. Prue continued, stepping forward, hands clenching at her sides. "Nigel Renshaw threatened to expose me, my charity accounts, my mistakes. I wanted only to frighten him, to make him think twice before publishing the next issue." She paused, letting her words sink in. Her eyes flashed, sharp and unrepentant, revealing a spark of the clever, calculating woman beneath the cultivated charm. "And yet," she said, voice dropping, "he drank anyway. Despite every warning, he drank. It was not my intention that the bitterness would be fatal, only that it would warn, frighten, and dissuade." A murmur ran through the hall. Some villagers were relieved that the act had not been premeditated murder. Others were frozen in astonishment at the revelation that their polished, admired Prue had orchestrated the incident with such precision. Agatha's expression softened, though her eyes remained sharp. "It was a crime of calculation," she said aloud, "but one without true malice. Yet deception and timing carried deadly consequences." Prue lowered her gaze briefly, then squared her shoulders. The fury in her stance suggested not regret, but exasperation at being caught, at the unraveling of her careful facade. The villagers leaned in, drawn to the drama and the clarity now present. Before anyone could speak further, the distant but unmistakable sound of sirens approached, growing steadily louder. Bill Wong and the local constables arrived, their presence grounding the chaos with official authority. Agatha stepped back, letting the officers take control. Her role as detective momentarily concluded. Prue's confession, tempered with fury rather than tears, satisfied the village's need for truth without resorting to brutality. Bill Wong, nodding at Agatha, began asking questions, clipboard in hand, while the constables guided Prue gently toward the side.
Her blue scarf fell slightly askew, and for the first time since the luncheon began, she looked vulnerable. Not defeated, but undeniably human. The villagers exhaled collectively, some exchanging whispers, others shaking their heads in disbelief, all processing the extraordinary revelation. Agatha tucked her notebook away, allowing herself a brief smile, satisfied with the resolution and the subtle justice that had been achieved. Hodge and Boswell, invisible but somehow present in her thoughts, would have approved. The cat's intuition validated, their human companion's patience rewarded. Agatha glanced around the hall one last time, noting the soft relief settling over the villagers. Suspense had lifted, laughter and gentle chatter beginning to replace tension. The sun, lowering toward the horizon, cast a warm glow over polished wood and relieved faces. Justice had been served, quietly and cleanly, the perpetrator confronted, the false confessions undone, and the village safe from further intrigue, for now. Agatha Raisin, notebook tucked away, and mind already wandering toward the next curiosity, allowed herself a final, measured breath. Calm had returned, the village restored to its gentle rhythm, and the promise of another mystery whispered faintly in the soft evening air.
Chapter 8. Carsely breathes again. The morning sun spilled gently over Carsely, illuminating dew-specked cobbles and the neat thatched roofs of cottages. Agatha Raisin walked along the familiar lane, the crisp air carrying the faint scent of baking bread and the distant chatter of villagers resuming their routines. The village felt almost normal again, though normal in Carsely was always a relative term. She arrived at Mrs. Bloxby's vicarage, greeted by the soft clink of china and the warm, calming aroma of freshly brewed tea. The two women sat by the window, overlooking the tidy churchyard where flowers nodded in the breeze. "Agatha, it's good to see you relaxed," Mrs. Bloxby said, pouring tea with the practiced ease of someone who had seen countless crises unfold. Agatha accepted her cup, inhaling the bergamot steam, allowing the moment to anchor her. "Relaxed is a relative term," she said dryly, stirring sugar absent-mindedly. "But yes, I suppose the village seems to have exhaled." Mrs. Bloxby smiled knowingly. "And what about you? Has the excitement faded into reflection?" Agatha glanced out the window, watching a postman tip his hat to a gardener arranging daffodils. Her mind drifted briefly to James Lacey, still distant, yet less a pang and more a quiet ache. "I think," she said, "I've learned something. About jealousy, about pride, about the stories we tell ourselves." She sipped her tea and allowed herself a wry smile. Prue Devonshire's charm was infuriating, yes, but observing her reminded me of my own vanity, my assumptions, and my need to meddle. Mrs. Bloxby nodded, pouring more tea. "Reflection paired with a good cup can be healing. Even tactical forgiveness has its uses." Agatha chuckled softly. "Tactical forgiveness," she repeated. "I like that. It suits village life. Small betrayals, small victories, and the occasional dramatic confession." She paused, eyes on the delicate swirl of steam rising from her cup. "I may even extend it to myself." Outside, children ran past the vicarage, squealing and laughing, their innocence untainted by scandal or subtle murder. The smell of toast drifted from nearby cottages, buttery warmth mingling with tea and flowers. Agatha felt a quiet joy settle in her chest, a simple comfort after weeks of suspense and calculation. "I suppose," she continued, "there's something grounding about tea, toast, and conversation. It reminds us that life, well, moves on, even when the extraordinary interrupts." Mrs. Bloxby raised her eyebrow, amused. "And your two cat companions? Have they resumed their critique of your domestic habits?" Agatha laughed, the sound light and unburdened.
Oh, Hodge and Boswell are as judgmental as ever. They've kept me humble, reminded me that even the cleverest deductions are subject to their scrutiny. The two women shared a moment of quiet amusement, letting the tension of the past days dissipate into laughter and the gentle hum of village life. Agatha's gaze drifted to the window again, where the streets of Carsely carried the soft, comforting rhythm of routine. Arguments, mysteries, and rivalries faded into the background as the village exhaled collectively. Her mind returned briefly to James, distant, yes, but less a wound than a gentle reminder of past lessons. She finished her tea, set the cup down carefully, and straightened her posture. Yes, she said softly, life continues, and perhaps with careful observation and a bit of humility, I'll navigate the next challenge with a touch more wisdom. The sun glinted off the vicarage windows, the warmth a balm. Agatha Raisin felt the small satisfaction of closure, tempered with curiosity for what lay ahead. Carsely breathed again, and for now, that was enough.
Agatha Raisin returned to her cottage in the soft, late afternoon light, the village of Carsely quietly resuming its unhurried rhythm. Birds twittered in the hedgerows, a distant lawnmower hummed lazily, and the faint scent of fresh bread drifted from Mrs. Pritchard's bakery. Agatha exhaled, allowing the tension of the past days to slip from her shoulders. Inside, Hodge and Boswell were already waiting, tails flicking impatiently, eyes narrowing with the judgment only cats could deliver. Hodge perched on the counter, poised like a tiny general ready to inspect the spoils of battle. Boswell's paws tapped against the floor, a gentle drumbeat of expectation. "Right, you two," Agatha said, rolling up her sleeves. "Time for your reward." Bowls of chicken and a sprinkling of salmon treats appeared in short order. Hodge sniffed again, and began eating with the air of a commander awarding medals. Boswell circled twice, pawed the nearest teacup, and finally settled, dining with precise deliberation. Agatha leaned against the counter, watching them. "Victory," she murmured, "is sweetest when shared." Her gaze wandered to the neat row of teacups she had washed and polished earlier, each one now free of invisible danger, ready to host countless future cups of tea without incident. The cottage smelled of cat fur, toasted bread, and the faint lingering scent of bergamot from her earlier tea. Outside, Carsely's streets were quiet, windows opening for fresh air, the occasional shout of children, the clatter of doors as villagers resumed their routines. Peace, however temporary, had settled across the village like a soft quilt. Agatha reached for her notebook, flipping through the neatly organized pages. Each note, each observation, every deduction that had led to the revelation now lay clearly recorded. She allowed herself a small, private smile. The puzzle had been solved, the threads untangled. Hodge mewed insistently, demanding attention. Boswell pawed at her ankle, reminding her that victory could also include strokes and murmurs of praise. Agatha chuckled and complied, patting each cat in turn. Their approval, she reflected, was more rewarding than any public acknowledgement. A soft knock at the door interrupted their quiet routine. Agatha opened it to find the postman, hands full, cheeks pink from the chill. Among the letters and parcels, a single envelope stood out, thick, official-looking, and addressed to her in neat, familiar handwriting. She tore it open, revealing the latest edition of the village newsletter. The front page gleamed, announcing upcoming events, parish news, and even a small feature lauding Carsely's resilient community. Agatha's lips curved in a gentle smile, feeling the satisfaction of restoration ripple through her. The newsletter, innocuous and cheerful, symbolized continuity and the quiet joy of a village ready to embrace its routine once more. Hodge settled onto her lap, purring, while Boswell curled around her feet, both offering the subtle, unwavering judgment of cats who knew the truth. Agatha stroked their fur, listening to the soft rumble of contentment, letting it wash over her. "Not bad," she murmured, "not bad at all." For now, the village was safe,
The mysteries resolved, the misdirections exposed, and the lessons learned. Carsely had breathed again, and Agatha Raisin, tired, triumphant, and slightly smug, allowed herself the rare luxury of peace. Her gaze drifted to the window, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the cobbles. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the familiar thrill of curiosity flickered, the gentle whisper that mysteries never truly end. But for tonight, she decided, it could wait. Hodge and Boswell had won too, in their quiet, unassuming way. Victory was theirs as much as hers, and the peace, for now, was complete.